नमस्कार, मैं हूं आशुतोष पाठक। अमेरिका की संस्था सीडीसी अब स्वीकार कर रही है कि उससे बहुत बड़ी गलती हो गई है और नए गाइडलाइंस जारी करना चाह रही है। हमारे यहां समस्या यह है कि हम ब्लाइंडली अमेरिका के फॉलोअर हो गए हैं। हमारे भारत में एक मुख्यमंत्री हैं जो अमेरिका के अखबार में जो कुछ भी छप जाता है उसको ये प्रचारित करता है कि दुनिया का सबसे ताकतवर देश और वहां की सबसे बड़ी मीडिया आउटलेट उसने उनके बारे में कुछ छाप दिया है और इसीलिए हम अंधानुकरण करते हैं अमेरिका का। लेकिन अब वही अमेरिका खुद बवालों में फंस गया है। सेंटर फॉर डिजीज कंट्रोल सीडीसी ने एक्सेप्ट किया है 11,000 क्षमता वाली 11,000 एम्प्लॉय की क्षमता है सीडीसी की, सबसे बड़ी संस्था है डिजीज कंट्रोल करने की। उसने स्वीकार किया है कि पेंडेमिक कंट्रोल करने में उनसे ड्रामेटिक मिस्टेक हो गया, बहुत बड़ी गलती हो गई और अब वो ओवरहॉल करना चाहते हैं सीडीसी में कंप्लीट रिफॉर्म करना चाहते हैं। आज इसी मुद्दे पर वहां अमेरिका के मीडिया में बवाल मचा हुआ है। क्या फाइनेंशियल टाइम्स, क्या ब्लूमबर्ग, क्या वॉशिंगटन पोस्ट, क्या एनबीसी न्यूज, न्यूयॉर्क पोस्ट, सीएनबीसी, इंडिपेंडेंट और कौन सा ऐसा न्यूज आउटलेट है जो उनकी इस खबर को रिपोर्ट नहीं कर रहा है। लेकिन मैं इस खबर के बीच में कुछ षड्यंत्र देख रहा हूं। दोनों बातें हो सकती हैं कि सीडीसी अपना पल्ला झाड़ रही है, सीडीसी स्किप गॉड ढूंढ रही है, या सीडीसी फंसते हुए अब जब देख रही है कि वो फंस रही है तो कुछ ओवरऑल करने का ड्रामा और कुछ ट्रांसपेरेंट होने का ड्रामा भी कर रही है कि हाँ हमसे गलती हो गई। तो आज हमारे साथ ज्वाइन कर रहे हैं कैलिफोर्निया से डॉक्टर पीटर मैकॉला। डॉक्टर पीटर मैकॉला from California. I welcome you, Dr. Peter.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Aruna Rodriguez from Madhya Pradesh. She has been a great activist, Aruna. Dr. Amitabh Banerjee from Pune. Dr. Arvind Kushwaha from Nagpur. And Prakash Pohre, editor-in-chief of Deshonnati newspaper.
Good
from
evening.
Maharashtra, Akola. Good evening.
Good evening.
And Bhaskar Raman, Professor Bhaskar Raman, Professor of IIT Mumbai. He is also joining us. So I welcome all my esteemed panelists. And let me ask a first question to Dr. Peter McCullough. I have seen your video on Fox News, Dr. Peter. What mistake CDC chief Walensky is talking about, and media is reporting some dramatic mistakes. What does it mean? Some dramatic mistakes. And what are these mistakes, Dr. Peter?
America was stunned. In fact, the world was stunned with a series of admissions that came on the heels of some revised CDC recommendations. The CDC is largely now dropping major recommendations that wrecked America and wrecked the world with respect to contagion control and vaccination. But the reforms now appear to be those that are going to be widespread. There'll have to be a change out of leadership, installation of external oversight on many aspects of the agency. We need experts to actually oversee what's going on in the CDC. And then we need strict US congressional and senatorial oversight on the agency. You know, the agency has conflicts of interest. They receive money from pharmaceutical companies, from patent revenues, and they have been basically unsupervised throughout the pandemic with an overreach of their recommendations, which has been disastrous for the US and the world.
But what are these mistakes, doctor? What C is talking about? Are these mistakes that lockdown was not fair enough? Mask mandate was not fair enough, and the vaccine mandate was not fair enough.
All of that is true. We basically understood that the virus was only transmitted from a symptomatic person to a susceptible person, and that the virus was only a serious threat to the elderly and those with multiple conditions. So the Great Barrington Declaration, which was written in November of 2020 by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya from Stanford, Martin Kulda from Harvard, and Sunita Gupta from Oxford, they were correct. The Great Barrington Declaration was correct. We only needed to protect our seniors. Lockdowns were not needed. The CDC refused to recognize natural immunity. Once someone had the infection, subsequent infections were progressively more mild and not of serious risk for hospitalization and death. And then lastly, the CDC failed to recognize that the vaccines had serious safety issues and had a progressive loss of efficacy.
But now they are saying that they are preparing for next pandemic. And they admitted that in last 75 years, all their preparation failed completely. And now they are making the statement that they are preparing for next pandemic. So they are careful about monkeypox.
I can tell you, I've looked at the data very carefully, and some of my fellow trainees, when I trained at the University of Washington in Seattle, are CDC officers. So the CDC has always been good at outbreak investigation, data analysis, and in vitro diagnostics. The CDC had no role in widespread recommendations for the public or on therapeutics or even recommending vaccines that are in the emergent use phase. CDC was clearly overstepping the boundaries. There is no monkeypox emergency. The WHO and the US government have already declared monkeypox, which is a skin rash. It's a non-fatal skin rash. In the human-to-human transmission, it's taken on a pattern of a sexually transmitted disease with male-to-male sex. It is not a threat to the general population. It's easily treated with tecovirimat, an oral and intravenous drug. United States, despite thousands of cases, we treat this illness at home, and there are no fatalities. So there's clearly no worldwide emergency.
Aruna, I will allow everyone one by one. So let me go to Aruna first. Aruna, you have something to put in front of Dr. Peter, that what is the suggestion? What are the suggestions from CDC? Now they are willing to put in public domain.
I will read it out again because I don't know how to put it on the screen. However, I would just like to remind everybody that before this CDC statement came out, they actually came out and withdrew the RT-PCR. If you remember, Dr. McCullough, that amazing statement that we can't make out the difference between SARS-CoV-2 and the flu virus. Therefore, they withdrew the RT-PCR. That was in the July last year. Okay, let me read out the CDC recent statement. Those exposed to the virus are no longer required to quarantine. If you wish me to stop, Dr. McCullough, I will, in case you wish to comment.
No, go ahead.
On each of these.
Yeah, you can read out the,
Okay.
Yeah.
Number 2, unvaccinated people now have the same guidance as vaccinated people. Number 3, students can stay in class after being exposed to the virus. And finally, it is no longer recommended to screen those without symptoms. Those are the...
So, Dr. Peter, would you like to respond?
Yeah, well, first of all, let's take
Do you want me to say anything else? So over to Dr. McCullough.
Yeah, let me take it from here. This.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. We are listening to you. Yeah.
We have never clinically needed a quarantine people for those who are exposed, since only symptomatic can express it. The most important thing to do once exposed is to use virucidal nasal washes with dilute povidone iodine or dilute hydrogen peroxide. So there is an action, but people can stay in school and at work. This admission that the vaccinated are indistinguishable from the unvaccinated is basically a tacit admission on failure of the vaccines to prevent illness to block transmission or to reduce the severity of illness. They're indistinguishable from a public health perspective. The important conclusion here is that the vaccines cannot be mandated and should not be mandated in schools or workplace, government agencies, or the military if the CDC says from a public health perspective they're indistinguishable. And then finally, the burden of routine testing to get on airplanes, to cross borders in schools, the workplace, and the military. All of that routine testing was a waste of time and money. All the studies show the positive rate was less than 1%, and when positive, it was mainly false positive. The WHO in June of 2020 said stop asymptomatic testing, and now it takes over a year before the US CDC now harmonizes with the WHO. This is really a tragedy. It's a public health blunder by the CDC, and I'm really sad that the world in so many different regions follows the CDC with the flawed guidelines that they've put out over time.
Doctor, what will happen for those who committed mistakes? Simply they are saying that some dramatic mistake done during this pandemic. Is it a fair statement? And they will go free.
There should be thorough investigation, and where crimes have been committed, and the big crimes are here fraud, where the CDC and CDC officers have been founded to defraud the United States and the world. I think they should be prosecuted. Civil charges should be put up against them. This will probably be done through the U.S. Senate and Congress and the Department of Justice.
Dr. Banerjee, because you're, I think, the biggest star on our show, and you are a great admirer of Dr. Peter McCullough. And when I was watching the video of Dr. Peter on Fox News, anchor herself was a great follower. So what is your question to Dr. Peter, Dr. Amitabh?
I think I will answer first Professor Peter's question. He asked whether India follows the CDC. I would say they blindly follow, because we have a Indian Public Health Association. I am a member of Indian Public Health Association. We have a Association of Indian Epidemiology Association. Then we have a Association of Preventive and Social Medicine. So all these three associations put up a document to the government of India. At the start of the pandemic, when the first lockdown was implemented in India, we put up a document to them that in India, we do not require lockdowns. It will cause collateral damage. Then after the community transmission was evident, we recommended in the second document that we should stop the contact tracing. I mean, it is waste of resources. And no cognizance was taken of our document. We put 4 documents. It is on a website. And that means the advisors to the government were blindly following the WHO and the CDC. In fact, some of the court rulings also, informally, the judges said the whole world is following it. We can't encourage vaccine hesitancy. We cannot stop the contact tracing and test. Even now, I think recently the Director General Civil Aviation has given some instructions on masking in the aircrafts and other things. I think again the restrictions are coming back in some parts of India. That is the first statement I wanted to make, that the CDC changing its stance will definitely have a trickle-down effect in India, because we have been blindly taking them as experts. Secondly, I don't know, because just a day before yesterday or yesterday only, my friend, his grandchild is in USA, 1.5-year-old child, and he says that the child has already recovered from COVID and the child is being advised to take the vaccination. Just a less than 2-year-old child. And so I was just wondering, in spite of the CDC changing the guideline, has it come down to the medical fraternity or the general public in USA? Because I was surprised, because in fact in India we don't have so much of pressure to vaccinate the children. But that was my question. What is the ground situation in USA?
Well, thanks for that analysis, Dr. Banerjee. And if India would have followed your recommendations, on lockdowns and contact tracing, the Indian people in the infrastructure would have been far better along. In the United States, the multiple employers, doctors groups, schools are still pushing childhood vaccination, despite the vast majority of children already having COVID, and they have a negligible risk of acquiring the infection. So childhood vaccination should be dropped. You know, the country of Denmark now has completely dropped childhood vaccination. The state of Florida in the United States is not supporting childhood vaccination. That variation in the thinking on childhood vaccination should tell you that it's not supportable by the science and there's great safety concerns.
So now, before going to Dr. Arvind Kushwaha, he's a doctor in Premier Mohs Institute of India, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Nagpur. I am just putting one question in front of you, Dr. Peter, that what is the relationship between CDC and WHO?
My understanding is the relationship is actually strong from an overall administration perspective, but in fact, the two agencies haven't followed each other. You know, I mentioned the CDC not following the WHO and asymptomatic testing. Do you know what a giant problem was? Is the WHO said not to use remdesivir in November of 2020, and the US CDC, NIH, and FDA continue to encourage remdesivir. In fact, our Health and Human Services put a 20% bonus on the hospital payment if they use remdesivir. That led to countless excess deaths in the United States due to COVID-19. Remdesivir doesn't work late in the illness. In fact, it causes kidney damage and liver damage. So, you know, the WHO and CDC have not been harmonized on important points, yet overall, they seem to be wanting to grab more and more power over basically countries in the world.
Dr. Kushwaha, I think that there is a great connivance between CDC and WHO, and now they are taking the call. And all 198 countries of world, they are following blindly, I think. So, Dr. Kushwaha, do you think that the whole vaccination philosophy is losing the credibility? No one is going to trust even any vaccine for that matter. Even in India, people are saying on the street that we don't trust vaccination philosophy.
Absolutely, I do agree with your contention, and this overzealous, indiscriminate, unscientific use of mass vaccination in this pandemic has probably done the greatest disservice to the vaccines and their credibility. In times to come, you know, the other vaccines which are useful and which are required to prevent diseases will take a beating. So that's, I think, probably the biggest disservice that this vaccination policies across the countries have done. Now, we have ended up in a endless situation where more vaccines were given as the panacea for ending this pandemic to begin with. You know, in the beginning, the WHO, the CDC, and other agencies said that once you get vaccinated, you don't pass on the virus, and therefore the transmission stops, and therefore we can end the pandemic. But it never happened, because to begin with, the vaccines were never tested for that prevention of infection. They were tested for curtailing the severity of the disease. And that's where actually they never fulfilled the very definition of a vaccine in the beginning in COVID vaccines. So we have ended up in a situation of a perpetual pandemic driven by the vaccinations, you know, where more vaccines, they produce non-sterilizing antibodies in the human host. And ultimately what ends up is a pressure, immune pressure on the virus, which, you know, tends to mutate and become a new variant. And therefore a new variant asks for more pressure on more vaccination. And therefore this becomes an endless kind of a situation where you are not able to exit. So now the problem with the CDC, the WHO, and other agencies and other countries is how to exit the situation. It's very simple. You just have to stop indiscriminate vaccination. Mass vaccination should be stopped right now and everywhere simultaneously. You reserve it only for people who are very high risk, as the Great Barrington Declaration had made arrangements for focused protection that we have been talking right from the beginning. That do not bother about healthy people. They are going to be fine. The children are going to be fine. Let's not, unnecessarily stop the life. But what has happened is overzealous propagation, marketing. I don't know. There may be money or the dollars or the vaccine lobbies behind it. Whatever decision making that the countries are doing. But at the same time, we are ended up in a situation where we do not know how to exit. And the only way out right now, I feel, is that you must stop vaccinating people who are healthy and who are already recovered from infection even once. You never vaccinate an infected, recovered person. You never. It's never been practiced earlier. Now we are doing it. I don't know. I mean, there are very few people who got infected and then did not take vaccine like me. But most of the people were told, no, you have to take. That's the wrong messaging that was done. And the another thing that probably needs to be done is stop vaccinating, stop unnecessarily. Genomic sequencing is a research tool. It's only for people to find out, okay, is there any variation in the new strain which can be, harmful to the host. That's all. You don't have to declare a variant right in the beginning. Okay, new variant has been found and create scare. Omicron, when it came, and when we were, probably discussing this issue, and India had not recorded Omicron initially. And I knew that once India had already gone through the pandemic in the second wave, and almost 75 to 80% of the population was already exposed, there was no scare. I mean, I knew it won't make any dent in Indian population, and exactly it happened. The Omicron wave never occurred in India. And literally the same models, mathematical modeling was another biggest damage that they have done. The IIT Kanpur and Imperial College of London, all those kind of modelings actually damaged, because people thought the whole world is going to be wiped out by this coronavirus, which was never going to happen. And I feel that now we should stop actually this COVID vaccines anymore in any healthy person and anybody who is already recovered.
But Dr. Kushwaha, many times you said on my show that if any institution committed mistakes, they should accept. And here your lovely CDC institution accepted the mistake. So what would you say?
I would say that
accepting the mistakes.
See, the mistakes were already known to many people like us. Dr. Peter is there, Dr. Jyot is there, then Jai Bhattacharya sir is there. All those people who had probably been thinking on these lines, we already knew they were making mistakes. But the biggest mistake was not, probably taking out wrong policies, but biggest mistake was not listening to the dissenting voices. That was the biggest mistake. And possibly if had they listened to us, the dissenting voices, we are not talking in thin air. We were talking basically based on proven scientific facts. Like a naturally infected person doesn't require a vaccine. It needs no, kind of a research paper to prove it. It is a long established fact. And, had they listened to us and had they probably, taken a very calculated and, approach to pandemics. Now, once the community transmission establishes, there is no role for asymptomatic testing. There is no role for contact tracing. There is no role for any closures. There is no role for school closures, lockdowns, nothing. Community transmission once established, actually lockdowns propagate the transmission. Actually, the lockdowns increase transmission because the transmission is indoors. It is domestic. You see families, one person gets infected, he now infects everyone because everybody is inside the house. They are not moving out. So we actually went wrong. And the biggest problem that I think that they did was keeping people confused by repeated, confused messaging. Once they say use mask, no mask, then again use mask, vaccinated, need not use mask, vaccinated, use mask. I had made a presentation on flip-flops of the CDC and WHO, very interesting one. If somebody wants to have it, I can, send it across. It's actually be keeping people absolutely clueless, and it's very easy to pass any kind of judgment, especially to a confused clientele, and that's what exactly happened here.
Dr. Peter, we were in fact saying for last 2 years that they will introduce vaccine, then the second dose of vaccine, then the booster dose, then the precautionary dose, and it is all happening. And we were proven right. So now CDC is accepting only mistakes. So will you allow them to go free?
No, I agree with Dr. Arvind. There's no doubt about it. The vaccines mandate should be dropped and the vaccines should actually be pulled off the market. They're obsolete. They're coded against the original Wuhan spike protein, which is no longer circulating. In June 11th, 2022, the World Council for Health issued a pharmacovigilance report calling for all the vaccines to be pulled off the market, all of them, and undergo a thorough safety review. With the US CDC plus the UK yellow card system, the EU UDRA system, and the WHO VigiSafe system, over 40,000 people have died within a few days of taking the vaccine. That is an astronomical number. It's far greater than any product ever introduced in the world. Millions of vaccine injuries and disabilities. They're frankly unsafe, and they've been used indiscriminately. And as Dr. Arvind pointed out, they should never be used in a COVID recovered patient. In fact, those are the people who are likely receiving these injuries and sadly dying after the vaccine, and they don't need it because they've already had the illness. Vaccination should have only been considered high risk and limited to seniors and those with high risk features and under very careful safety precautionary rules. They should not be widely, indiscriminately vaccinating healthy people up and down the societal ranks, and particularly children. We have no assurances that the vaccines are safe given in children. In the United States, the CDC is advising vaccines down to age 6 months old. We have no assurances that's safe in terms of growth and development, none.
Now, doctor, I am bringing one very intelligent person before going to editor-in-chief of Deshonnati, Prakash Pohre, one of the very finest researcher and faculty of IIT Mumbai, Professor Bhaskar Raman. And I used to say that these tech mafias are more, they played a pivotal role in this pandemic. And they produced mathematical module. So Professor Bhaskar, what is your opinion? CDC must be having some researcher, some tech giant like you on their board? Unmute yourself.
To the extent that I have looked at CDC data, I have looked at some of the publications, internal publications which they have. They come out with these scary looking infographics once in a while. Like, for example, some time back, they came out with an infographic saying that 1 in 5 COVID recovered people are suffering from long COVID. They had a similar thing for children also a few weeks back. Given I have a minor in statistics, and of course I read a lot of student reports and so on. So it's very easy to pick out what statistical flaws they introduce in order to get at these numbers. It's very transparent. They basically use the same set of bag of tricks. Like, for example, they look at already hospitalized patients and use the wrong definition of what is fully vaccinated. They don't even look at vaccinated versus unvaccinated. They assume that vaccinated people are not infected. all sorts of such blatant flaws they have, and they come out with these numbers which are scaring the public, and basically in some way convincing them to take more of these vaccines. I was just looking at some of the numbers which came out in around the turn of 2020, when the vaccines were given emergency use approval. The emergency use approval was based on some randomized controlled trial of a few months. So I was looking at numbers in the original publications of the three most popular vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and AstraZeneca. AstraZeneca is nothing but Covishield, which is about 90% used in India. I'll just read out some numbers. In the trial, the fraction of severe COVID among the trial participants in the Pfizer trial was 10 out of about 43,000. So the number of patients who were afflicted with severe COVID in all the months of trial was 0.023%, which is an abysmally low number. So it is unclear how they twisted that number. Rather, it is very clear to me. It's unclear how they got away with twisting this kind of number to claim 95% efficacy, and basically pull wool over the eyes of so many scientists and statisticians and doctors and so on. Similarly, the number for Moderna is 30 patients out of 30,000 patients had severe COVID in their trial. So basically, the statistical flaw in the whole thing is that they mixed up age groups all the way from 16 to over 65, and they have vastly different risk profiles. So any statistician looking at this kind of trial design can say easily that it's a flawed design. You're not going to get any statistically significant numbers, and the numbers that I'm quoting for severe COVID are statistically insignificant from the original trials. So now they're claiming the claim, even among those who admit that the vaccines do not stop the transmission, they keep claiming that the vaccines prevent severe COVID. On what basis? There is no, the strongest basis in evidence-based medicine is a randomized controlled trial, and the randomized controlled trial results absolutely do not show this.
Dr. Peter, why I called Professor Bhaskar, because I never seen your interview with any of television group or any host, that they raised some question that this pandemic was not the subject of medical science indeed. It was the subject of technology mafia. And they very dramatically used the data produced by tech giants and some finest engineers. They produced mathematical data. And on the basis of those data, they predicted everything. They predicted vaccine mandate, they predicted mask mandate, they predicted they locked down, they introduced lockdown. On these flaws, on these fault line, and they are saying that this was the subject of medical science. We believe inwardly that some deceitful person, they introduced these kind of data, and it was not at all a medical science subject. So these Gates and their companion introduced this pandemic. Don't you agree?
I agree, and we know now under court-ordered documents, America First Legal has pressed the CDC, and we now learn the CDC was meeting with tech giants, Twitter, Facebook, other social media companies, and they were meeting with them regularly to shape a false narrative and target scientists who are trying to bring truth to the world. Dr. Baskarin's analysis is excellent. In my podcast, the McCullough Report on America Out Loud Talk Radio, I just did a post on the four false claims of COVID-19 vaccination. The first false claim is that it stops the infection. Well, after the clinical trials, it was obvious thousands of people who took the vaccines were getting the infection. So the first claim went down. The second claim was the vaccine stopped transmission. And then our CDC director came out within a few months showing they don't stop transmission. Studies from Chow, Acharian, Corsi, Rimerisma all showed equal viral loads in the nasopharynx. Claim number 3 was that the vaccines reduce hospitalization and death. They make a milder syndrome. As Dr. Baskarin pointed out, not a single randomized trial was performed with death or hospitalization as the primary endpoint that showed reductions. Even as a secondary endpoint, it didn't reduce severity. So there was a series of fraudulent papers published that were very biased, trying to make the claim that the vaccines did something. They made a milder syndrome when they didn't. And finally, the fourth claim is expected. I think this fall, we're going to have a crushing, renewed push for vaccination. And the claim will be that the new vaccines prevent COVID from coming back. And I want to warn Americans and the Indian people, don't accept that fourth claim. Right now, they've given up on clinical trials in the United States. There are no more clinical trials. They've approved the new vaccines, the bivalent vaccines, based on antibodies. Antibodies are a poor surrogate for clinical outcome, and they should not be accepted.
Prakash ji, do you think that we as a blind follower of American CDC and WHO guidelines, do you think that when CDC accepted mistakes, do you believe the Indian agency will show at least a minimum courtesy that yes, we have done mistakes? Do you think so? Will they accept at least?
Ashutosh, I don't think there are any chances from the Indian government to accept their mistake, because they have not done the mistake. They have done this thing deliberately. That much I am confirmed. I am not a doctor nor a scientist, but I am a journalist, and I am famous for my blunt opinions always. I would like to ask certain questions to Dr. McCullough. Questions, these are my queries, rather. Not because Dr. Peter McCullough is no way is responsible from this thing. As
from India.
On the contrary, I am thankful. Yeah, on the contrary, I am thankful to him being so blunt and being so cooperative to our shows and to Indian people also. I would just wanted to know what action American government do you think will take about
CDC.
Against CDC, against this Fauci, also what CDC recommendation about RT-PCR test now? What will be their recommendation, or what will be their stand about RT-PCR test, when it was clearly said that the RT-PCR tests are not meant for such type of testing? But still the CDC have recommended and the whole world was depending on RT-PCR test only.
Because everybody is saying nowadays that this pandemic is a RT-PCR pandemic.
RT-PCR pandemic, yeah. So these are few questions and the queries which which are there in my mind, and also what about the wrong medications suggested by the CDC, WHO to control or to
prevent the pandemic,
for the treatment, and due to which lakhs of people died, lakhs of people facing problems in India. So the people who took jobs due to fear, and now they are facing the problems. So these are the basic questions or some in my mind. I hope we should discuss on these issues also.
Well, let me just
Dr. Peter.
respond to the PCR issue. The CDC's original PCR methodology, which the hospitals adopted, could not distinguish between influenza and COVID. So invariably, flu was misdiagnosed as COVID originally. Then commercial manufacturers adopted PCR techniques that were off the CDC methodology. The problem there is the CDC said keep the cycle threshold less than 28, and the manufacturers didn't follow that. Now the CDC is suggesting confirmatory testing, which I agree with. That is, if there is a PCR positive, that in fact it be confirmed with an antigen-based test or vice versa. We have been over-diagnosing COVID. And so there have been probably millions, if not tens of millions of cases that are not real cases of COVID. And the test should only be done in acutely symptomatic individuals. I agree with you. The CDC never had a care plan for America. There should have been always a set of recommendations to at least support community standard of care. Community standard of care, what the local doctors in the United States and India were doing, using drugs in combination. In fact, the Indians taught America about ivermectin and how important ivermectin was in the appropriate weight-based dosing and for the appropriate duration of time. United States, the only oral drug that's been endorsed by the government agencies is Paxlovid, which is the combination of nirmatrelvir and ritonavir. And now the CDC has put out a warning on it called Paxlovid rebound, meaning that it extends the illness, creates more infectivity, and doesn't get people better. And it happens in the fully vaccinated, because those who are vaccinated, the immune system cannot properly respond to the new variants.
Dr. Kushwaha is willing to ask some question. Dr. Kushwaha?
Sorry. Actually, there are not many questions. We need to find more answers rather. So as we have been, through this pandemic for more than 2.5 years, and it's still counting. I think it's time that the science is restored, the reason is restored, and possibly the life is restored in general for the world. So for that, whatever, the voices, the so-called dissenting voices against the mainstream COVID narrative now needs to find a place.
How life will restore, doctor?
Yes, life will restore.
Any punishment for those who committed mistakes? How?
Absolutely, as Dr. McCullough and has already mentioned, the whole saga of this pandemic must be investigated in detail across the world, and all those responsible for making such decisions which were against the interest of the public and the community must be brought to the book, and such white papers must come out from all the countries. And people responsible for making such rash, unscientific decisions must be brought to the book, because we will end up making the same mistakes in case of next pandemic whenever it happens, or whenever it is, possibly, it occurs by chance or by man-made. I don't know really. I'll just give you an example. Monkeypox thing, which is being declared a public health emergency of international concern by Dr. Tedros, unilaterally going against the recommendations of the expert committee on emergency preparedness of the WHO, where it was declined by 9:6 votes. Very clear mandate, and of course there was no doubt that there is no need to declare it as a public health emergency of international concern. We have been saying that it's a restricted infection amongst a select group of people. That is MSM, male having sex with males. That was very clear right from the beginning. And with the very poor secondary attack rate of this particular infection, And there is no likelihood of this infection becoming a pandemic in any way. There was no doubt that doesn't require to be labeled as a PHEIC by Dr. Tedros. So this kind of, if he's sitting as a, WHO Director General, does he have the power to overrule the expert committee? Then why have an expert committee? It's like having a expert committee on immunization in India and not listening to it, as we have seen in India. NTAGI never recommended so many National Technical Advisory Group on immunization did not recommend so many vaccines, including the children vaccine, but boosters as well, but they were still brought in. So we need to, understand that these scientific bodies which are made are not just, there for no reason. They should be listened to. Their advice must be adhered to. The Director General has got no, logic or reason or any kind of scientific basis to overrule that expert committee. Why did he do that? That we must question that, and probably it needs answers from the WHO itself. I'll just give you an example. I was, taking part in the Diamond Jubilee celebrations of my alma mater, that is Armed Forces Medical College, Pune. And there were thousands of people who had gathered, and of course, everybody was maskless. Of course, we've all given up. We all know that it is no longer existing. We don't need it. So, I was staying in a room which had some Aedes mosquitoes all around, and they bit me around. So on my elbow, I get a small lesion, which was like a pupule, and then became a vesicle because I rubbed it. And had it been somebody else, he would have gone for testing RT-PCR, and he would have become the case of monkeypox. But I didn't go. I knew that it's a mosquito bite. So of course, this is what we need to learn. That if you go with a lesion and get a RT-PCR for monkeypox, you'll end up as a case of monkeypox, and then you'll be taking a history whether do you belong to the high risk group or not. Even though you may deny, people will still possibly not believe you. So
Dr.
we need
Peter,
to be, yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Kushwaha. Dr. Peter, because we are already running off time. Dr. Peter, if I will ask you that whom you think that these people or these organizations are the real culprit, because CDC, if CDC is accepting that they have done mistake, so who are these people? Do you think the WHO is the real kingpin organization, or the CDC, or some Gates-like company, Melinda Gates and Gates Foundation and Fauci? Who are they? Because see, in India, I am telling you, Dr. Peter, giving you one example, Dr. Peter, 1 month back, few corrupt doctors appeared on national television channels, and they tried to introduce monkeypox theory. We have taken the charge along with Dr. Kushwaha, Dr. Banerjee, Bhaskar Raman, and Prakash Ji and Aruna like activists. We took the charge, and we kept pushing this agenda that they corrupt people are again pushing their own agenda. And now people are convinced. And let me tell you, doctor, 2 days back, we have written a letter from WHO. Professor Bhaskar has sent a letter to the Prime Minister of India. And I think that they will certainly go through this letter, and they will certainly respond this time. And now suddenly monkeypox news disappeared from national news channels. We prevent us from third wave of COVID. We prevented at least fourth wave of COVID, and then the pediatric wave of COVID, and ultimately from monkeypox. So, whom you at least say that these organizations and peoples must be and thoroughly investigated and must be sent to jail.
In our book, Courage to Face COVID-19, which we've reviewed on this program, and Runa Rodriguez has published some wonderful book reviews and international periodicals. We use the term biopharmaceutical complex, and this is basically a syndicate. And at the top is the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, The entity that they formed called CEPI, the Center for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, the Gavi, Eco Health Alliance, the Chinese Communist Party, the US CDC, NIH, and FDA, Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Wellcome Trust. They are all working as a syndicate, and they have one goal: mass vaccination for every pandemic, one after another. Their only solution is mass vaccination. The biopharmaceutical complex must be stopped. The best way to stop it is to reject these vaccines.
Dr. Banerjee, anybody would like to say something?
I have two questions. Acha, Dr.
Okay.
Aruna. Acha,
Yeah,
you have two-
one by one. So ladies first.
Okay.
No,
Dr. Aruna.
Amitabh, please go ahead.
Amitabh,
Please.
okay, Dr. Banerjee,
I'll
please.
keep it short. Just a couple of months back, I think, Peter, you were served a notice by some your association.
Yes. What is the status of that notice?
Do you retain your license or the other person?
you lost your license.
What is the status?
No.
I received a notice of disciplinary action from the American Board of Internal Medicine, where I have in my fourth decade of perfect track record. In fact, my research and my publications are relied upon by the board for testing worldwide. And Senator Ron Johnson sent a letter calling the American board out for a meeting. They refused to attend. The Association of American Physicians and Surgeons now has a lawsuit against the American Board of Internal Medicine to try to protect doctors against censorship. The American board is trying to have a professional review based on my statements under oath in the Texas Senate. Under oath. Under oath means to the best of our ability to answer questions from the senators. Doctors and engineers, nurses, lawyers, we should have immunity when we are giving testimony to the best of our ability under senatorial proceedings. In fact, we cannot be professionally injured by this. So the American board has not responded to any of these actions, and now we're waiting for their final decision.
That is
So will they acknowledge your senatorial proceedings? Will they acknowledge?
No.
That is
No.
encouraging, and the same standards should apply to the CDC staff also, because now they also made mistakes in good faith or bad faith, whatever it is. So they should also be scrapped. That is one. And that is the first question. And the second question is, I just saw a tweet by Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, Professor Martin Kulldorff. He had, I think, initiated legal proceedings against all these authorities who have misled. I think including the president of USA also, I think, if I am not wrong. So probably, is it a effect of that CDC is trying to find a face-saving gesture, or perhaps the movement is there now to bring people to justice? So just a thought which came to me.
The CDC is under pressure. Multiple lawsuits. American First Legal is one of the lead organizations. The FDA under pressure from lead attorney Aaron Siri. Remember, Pfizer had to release its documents under court order, and the FDA tried to cover it up. The FDA did not want to release the documents for 55 years. Pfizer knew about 1,223 deaths after their vaccine within a matter of a few days, and Pfizer did not stop their vaccine from going forward. Multiple lawsuits. I'm suing Twitter. And that case has standing since Twitter has basically used its common carrier capacity to censor and professionally injure some Twitter users. We must get justice. The courts are corrupt, but we must press forward.
The worst situation facing all across world, even courts, we do not have belief and faith in courts. The same in, but here in India, at least we are fighting, and we have a little hope in the court of law. Aruna, you wanted to ask something?
Yes, I actually want to say something. I think in India, we must be very careful not to allow the WHO any leadership role at all. They were responsible for this pandemic. It's called a plandemic. On the 13th of January 2020, they agreed and approved the Drosten Protocol at 45 cycle thresholds at which you can throw out an RT-PCR. It has no meaning whatsoever. And in any case, an RT-PCR was always supposed to be accompanied,
Understood.
Dr. McCullough, please confirm this, with a diagnostic report from a medical practitioner. So we must be very careful because they've got a pandemic treaty. We must make absolutely certain that they have no role to play in India.
We are opposing out and out WHO, Aruna, and I believe now they are in fight with Indian government too, but matter is something different. My last question would be to Dr. Peter. Dr. Peter, do you think that the WHO will investigate this pandemic, because their investigation is still inconclusive?
I don't anticipate the WHO to investigate. I think it's going to have to go to world courts in terms of the origins of the pandemic. Who are the players? This is outlined in part in our book, Courage to Face COVID-19. It's clear that SARS-CoV-2 was engineered. It was U.S. research done by the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill that wrote the grants. They actually wrote the papers, 2 papers by Menachery as the first author and Barrick as the senior author. The title of the paper is The Emergence of SARS-CoV-2 into Human Populations. They were published in Nature and Proceedings of the National Academy of Science in 2015. These are in the open. Now, the work was done in the biosecurity lab level 4 in Wuhan, China, since the work could not be done in the United States. And so there is a Chinese author, Dr. Shangri-La, who's on it. And she's considered the one expert in transferring the spike protein from the bat onto the human nucleocapsid. But they had humanized the respiratory epithelium of animals and clearly were trying to get the virus to invade the human body. This is all in the open. This was a plan to make the virus and then make a solution to it, being monoclonal antibodies in the vaccines. It's in the Menachery papers. This is a U.S. operation gone bad, and it's impacted the world, severely. But I think this squarely, the blame should be on United States and the Chinese Communist Party, and the players are clear. Moderna CEO Stéphane Bancel, he was the billionaire CEO of bioMérieux. He helped the Chinese build that biosecurity lab in Wuhan, China. And he left bioMérieux in 2015 to join Moderna and start making the vaccines. So he was clearly involved with this for many years. As Aruna points out, this was planned. It was a pandemic. And when it was released, it's been a disaster for the world. And many should be held accountable by world courts.
But doctor, I think we fail to understand, doctor, that here in India, not a single news outlet is reporting against the pandemic mainstream narrative. But in US, there are n number of news outlets. Forget about social media giants and Facebook and YouTube and other Twitter. There are n number of news outlets. They are reporting against these narrative. As you rightly said, that there is a trail, financial trail is completely established. Who gave money to whom and how gain of function research established. So it is in public domain. Who is obstructing for thorough investigation? What the FBI is doing, what CIA is doing. FBI is looking after Donald Trump. FBI is entering into the house of Donald Trump, but they are not investigating the biggest pandemic of the world.
It's true. Fortunately, in the United States, we do have heroic independent media. And myself, Dr. Bhattacharya, and a handful of doctors have a daily media exposure on national television to bring America the truth and at least a counter narrative to give some fair balance to the false narrative. But I think this is a U.S. operation. And I would imagine the CIA, Department of Justice, FBI, they're all involved in this, in trying to promote a false narrative onto the American people. This is the first time on a broad scale in our history of our country where people have lost faith in the government.
So precisely, doctor, you are saying that the US court, CIA, FBI and other intelligence agencies and medical institutions like CDC, NIH, and WHO all are hand in glove.
I would anticipate that's the case. Now, the relationship of the FBI, CIA to the healthcare agencies still needs to be worked out. But it's clear now we have a lawlessness in the United States. And you pointed out the raid on Mar-a-Lago, the house of the former president. Things seem to be off its axis in the United States, and we don't know where to turn for justice. The one thing that's clear is the entire agenda would fall if people reject the vaccines. If the whole population rejects the vaccines, the entire program falls.
Doctor, you are really the voice of humanity, and we all Indian have great faith in you, doctor, because Prakash ji, you want to say something?
No, I just wanted to say or suggest. Don't you think that Universal Health Organization (WHO) can sue WHO and CDC in international court?
I don't know. I can't render a legal opinion, but we need some place to go to seek justice. I can tell you the justice will come quickly if people reject the vaccines. If the people reject the vaccines worldwide, the WHO crumbles. Everything they've done is based on mass vaccination. They really have no other agenda outside to get a needle in every arm, and people have to say no.
Fortunately, doctor, there are members of WHO, Universal Health Organization, which is being formed a few months back in India. So all the members, I think the working committee members are available on this. So fortunately, so we think that the WHO should at least extend their footprint to the USA. And how you would support, doctor?
No, I agree. I think we need to have independent groups like that forming in India and the United States. We have multiple groups in the United States that have been coalescing to try to bring a true narrative to the country. But we need international collaboration. Probably one of the best is the World Council for Health. I think if you could support them, they're out of the United Kingdom. They have about 70 organizations under their umbrella, and they've done great work.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter and Dr. Amitabh Banerjee, Dr. Arvind Kushwaha, Prakash ji, Professor Bhaskar Raman, and Aruna Rodrigues. We shall certainly watch the next course of action of CDC, what Walensky will say in coming days, that she will overhaul the institution, what she will do in the next week or in 15 days or 30 days. We shall keep watching her. So thank you very much for joining from California, Dr. Peter, once again. And thank you all the panelists. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.